Welcome back, everyone, to the Google Ads Lead Gen Show. My name is Michelle Kopp, and this is,
This is Dean Hua from Sachi Studio.
and we are really excited today because our topic is on Google Ads bid strategies. So let's go ahead and just start diving into what are the common myths associated with smart bidding strategies for Google Ads. You want to take it away, Dean?
Yeah, sure. I think one of the biggest challenges that advertisers, media buyers, and do-it-yourself small businesses have with Google Ads is trying to make sense of all of the different smart bidding strategies that Google offers you. Um, if we limit this conversation to just lead generation, I think the two smart bidding strategies that we're dealing with is max conversions and max clicks, and then there's max conversions or target CPA. Um, I think the first myth that people have is that it's sort of a set it and forget it mindset, meaning you turn on the bidding strategy, whether it's max clicks or max conversions, and then boom, you're done, and then you're gonna let Google optimize for you. And it really doesn't work that way. The reality is that you have to have a very well structured campaign. You have to do your research on your keywords. Um, you can't cherry pick too much with your keywords because Google Ads really loves broad match keywords. So if you're too focused, meaning if you go too much with phrase match or exact match, smart bidding may not work out for you. But if you go too broad, you may end up getting really high cost per conversion metrics. So those are some of the dangers associated with smart bidding strategies. And I think that, again, just to kind of round it out, the first misconception people have is basically it's a set it and forget it mindset. What are your thoughts?
I'm aligned with that. Another common misconception that people tend to have when it comes to smart bidding strategies is that they will work right out of the gate. So if you're launching a campaign, people will expect the smart bidding strategies, whatever you set it, aligned with what you just said with set it and forget it. People think that it's going to work right out of the gate. Google doesn't work that way in terms of being able to produce and get you the results that you're looking for. It needs to collect data. There is a learning period of, it's about 10 days. I tend to tell clients it's like 10 to 14 days of learning in order to, start collecting data. But you also need to be aware too that you need to have a certain number of conversions in order for these smart bidding strategies to actually be the most effective. So my general rule of thumb, if we're going towards the maximize conversions route, I like to see my campaigns have anywhere from 25 to 30 conversions in the last month before I start switching things over. And then target CPA, I'll do the same as well. And maximize clicks. Maximize clicks, you don't necessarily need to give it that much time right out of the gate because it doesn't necessarily need necessary conversion data in order to be like that effective. Because the goal of maximize clicks is to maximize the volume of clicks. Maximize conversions is to maximize the number of conversions coming from your campaign.
Yeah, I just want to add to in terms of like how many conversions do you need in a 30-day period. I still like to go off of what Google said, which is 30 to 50 conversions in a 30-day period. I do think I've had a couple of campaigns where you can get away with like 20-ish, and then it'll optimize for you. I think the caveat is you have to be in a camp or in a niche where keyword variation isn't very high. So, for example, I have quite a few local businesses where really you're only dealing with maybe a dozen important keywords that would generate conversions. If you're dealing with that sort of niche, think like chiropractor, for example. If you know anything about the chiropractor niche, it's chiropractor near me, chiropractor in XYZ city, chiropractor back pain, and so on and so forth. If you're dealing with that sort of a niche, it's a lot easier to let mass conversions take over because it doesn't have to Google's algorithm. It doesn't have to sit there and sift through thousands of data points to optimize correctly. Whereas if you're dealing in a niche, let's say, for example, e-commerce or certain types of B2B campaigns where there's a high variation in keyword clusters, like the keywords you're bidding on are so different from each other, I think the algorithm is going to take a lot longer to optimize correctly for. So I just want to
Yeah.
add that to the entire discussion.
Yeah, so it really will depend on the industry. If you want to be safe, go with Google's recommendation, which is 30 to 50. But I have seen it work with a little bit less, like 25-ish, per campaign, not in total for the entire account. So that's just something that you need to keep in mind. And something else that I wanted to touch on when it comes to smart bidding strategies is you have to be really, really careful. Just exactly what you said, Dean, when it comes to a set it and forget it thing. People will just set it, and Google, if you speak to any Google reps, they're all going to tell you to set it to maximize conversions. That's their MO. They're trying to push that, and they're really trying to push right now maximize conversions plus broad match.
Mm.
That's what they're trying to really push when they're talking to advertisers right now. And I want to talk a little bit more about broad match a little bit later on in this call and some potential use cases for it. But the dangerous thing when it comes to these specific smart bidding strategies is if you don't set specific limits, Google can start going crazy with the amount that will start bidding. So you need to give it a little bit of room to breathe and to start learning, but then at the same time, you don't want to give Google the freedom to be bidding $100 $200 a click, which I've seen, especially like in the SaaS space and even like legal. Because if you're telling Google, I want to maximize conversions, Google is going to go and try to maximize your conversions by bidding as high as possible for specific keywords. But if you don't put a target CPA or something to kind of limit that, it will start spending like crazy. And of course, we have like other factors like a daily budget to like help to limit that. But at the same time, putting a target CPA there too will help like be that like security blanket per se to also help you. So that's one tip when it comes to maximize conversions. Use a target CPA. And then another one is going to also be for maximize clicks, put a max bid limit. So it doesn't start, bidding $100 $200 a click as well. Do you have thoughts on that?
So actually, I do have one clarification. So going back to max conversions, target CPA, um, are you the type to sit there and start out with max conversions target CPA immediately, or do you start out with max conversions and then eventually pivot over to TCPA?
So typically, it's going to depend on what type of budget I'm working with. Usually, when I'm starting out with, like, let's say if I had like a $5,000 ad budget and I've already, and this is a brand new account, I would usually start with more manual to start learning, start collecting the data. Once I have that minimum threshold, then I will switch it over to maximize conversions just for a little bit without putting the bid limit. And then once I start seeing what's coming through, then I'll put the bid limit to, not a bid limit, the target CPA. So I
Mm.
will let it breathe a little bit before I start, trying to tighten it in. But what I'll say is some people, they'll do a set it and forget it, and then they don't pay attention. And when it comes time to actually looking at the numbers and evaluating return on investment, they're not actually seeing, or they didn't actually notice that they were spending $50 to $100 a click for
Yeah, I
advertising.
know it's one of the challenges or mistakes that a lot of people make, again, media buyers and just do-it-yourselfers, is if they switch over to max conversions with target CPA, they're too aggressive with the target CPA, right?
Yeah,
So for example, let's just say, you're doing Legion and I don't know, you're a divorce lawyer and historically your cost per conversion is $100.
yeah,
And then, what lawyer wouldn't want a cost per conversion of $50, right? So they'll set a target CPA of $50, and then all of a sudden the entire campaign just completely tanks. And you're like,
yeah,
oh, what's wrong? And what people don't realize is that that could be too aggressive of a target CPA to set. So you have to be very realistic with your
Yeah.
target CPA. And when I sit there and explain that, they're like, oh, well, yeah, that makes sense. But in the heat of things, they're like, yeah, I want that $50 target CPA. And they don't understand that Google is struggling to find prospects who's going to convert at that target CPA.
Yeah, the problem is when you set it your target CPA to something unreasonable, essentially what you're doing is you're choking the campaign. You're not letting it breathe, you're not letting it, do its thing in order to get more data, in order to get you the best possible cost per acquisition. So, I had a client, I audited their account. It was probably maybe like 5 months ago, and she had the same issue. She's like, how come ever since I dropped my target CPA by like $50, I'm not seeing any more leads? And I
Mm.
was like, well, you're choking your campaign. You're not letting it breathe because what's happening is now Google's limiting itself to try to hit those targets that you're giving it. But then the amount of bids or the actual dollar amount to actually win those auctions is so much higher that it's just unrealistic to be able to appear for that. So that's the challenge. And she's starting to freak out, but I was telling her, well, my recommendation is either increase your target CPA or remove the target CPA, let it breathe, but monitor it like a hawk uh, to make sure that things are going in the direction that you want it to go.
Cool, cool. Um, do we want to talk about like pro tips?
Yeah. Do you have any that you want to start out with, and then we'll bounce off
Yeah,
that?
I think the first one, I mean, you kind of touched base on it, but the first pro tip I have before you even switch over to a smart bidding strategy like max conversions for lead gen is like you said, just start with manual bidding. Um, Make sure just the campaign structure is really tight in terms of like what sort of keywords you want to bid on. Make sure you have negative keywords uploaded correctly. Does all those little things, and then just start with manual bidding first and see how far you can get with that. I had one client, she's still a client. She's a doctor client of mine where we were doing manual bidding for a good 4 or 5 months. And right off the bat, I just kind of I basically knocked the campaign out of the ballpark, so to speak, where she was really happy with our cost per conversion. I would say in those first 4 months, our cost per conversion was $70, $80 for a phone call. And she was really happy with that. But by the fourth or fifth month, she was like, well, can we get this any lower? And I've tried a little bit of everything at that point, and I was like, well, we could try max conversions. And so we switched over to max conversions without a target CPA. So I didn't assign it a target CPA. We just switched over to max conversions. And within the first month, again, we crushed it. We were able to get it down to roughly $55 cost per conversion. So to go from $80 to $55, that's roughly a 30% drop in your cost per conversion. And she was more than happy with that. But yeah, I would say start with manual bidding first before you start trying with max clicks or before you start trying with max conversions. I think it's okay to do max clicks right off the bat.
Yeah, I agree. If you're going to do max clicks, though, put some type of bid limit as well. So aligned with what I mentioned earlier, just try to set something so that you're not, going way over budget when it comes to, bidding.
Yeah, the one thing I would say about max clicks is if you're assigning a bid limit, be careful of that, especially if you're dealing with a campaign where your keyword clusters are really different from each other. And again, I'll give you an example. Um, let's say you have one keyword cluster where all the keywords within this cluster is like on average $3 CPC within this campaign. And then you have another keyword cluster where again all the variations are maybe on average $10 cost per click. So you have one keyword cluster, $3 cost per click, and another one that's $10 cost per click. If you set too low of a max bid, let's just say $5, what ends up happening is that the algorithm, it's only going to probably generate clicks with the keyword clusters that's at $3 CPC.
Right, right,
Because the keyword cluster that's at $10 CPC, because your max bid is only at $5, you're not going to get any clicks from that.
right.
And so you want to be careful of that, because if your keyword cluster where the $10 CPC is generating the most conversions,
Yeah, you're gonna
your
choke.
conversions may drop.
Yeah, yeah. So maybe, with that scenario, what you'd want to do is then cluster your keywords together in their own those specific into their own specific campaigns, like the $5 keywords, the $10 keywords, and so forth. So in that approach, what I would do is I would run a manual CPC campaign just so that I could see what the average cost per click is in that specific geography for a little while. Then from there, then I'll start breaking out my campaign. So I'll have one campaign for like the lower, bids and one for the higher so that we can adjust that way. So there's so many different ways that you could structure things, but that is a good point as well. Typically, I like to see what my average CPC is before I start assigning bid limits as well.
Yeah, and just to kind of give a quick anecdote, if you don't assign a max or a bid limit to max clicks, I had one campaign where I turned on max clicks, and on average, before I turned it on, the average CPC was like $10, give or take. And as soon as I turned it on, there were a couple clicks where I was paying $75 cost per click. It was crazy. Thankfully, it was an outlier, but I've seen that happen quite a few times. So people
Right.
want to be careful of that.
Yeah, and I also want to take a few minutes too to emphasize that just because the name of these bid strategies sound attractive, they might not be the best approach for you as well. So we chatted about this in our last episode, but we talked about how max conversions. Everyone wants to maximize their conversions. They want to get as many leads as possible, but then and it sounds attractive, but then that's not really the best approach if you're starting right out of the gate. So we already shared some strategies in order to combat that so that you're set up for success by, letting your campaigns run with manual and then switching it over once you've hit a specific threshold. And maximize clicks, it doesn't sound attractive because, yeah, you want to maximize your click volume, but click volume at the end of the day isn't really everyone's end goal. So that's why Google's really nudging us to move over to max conversions. And that's their favorite bid strategy that they're trying to push everyone on in terms of, the smart bidding.
When should people use max clicks?
Um, so
I
so if you don't necessarily want to do manual, max clicks could be a good alternative.
and I guess why would people not want to do manual? Like, do you think it's just like lack of
Too much
bandwidth?
work. Yeah,
Okay.
probably is too much work going in there, one by one, and setting the bids, adjusting it. Especially if you have like a really big account with thousands of keywords, it might not be worth your time.
Yeah.
There were tools back then, still exist, like Kenshu, DoubleClick, and so forth. I'm not sure if they changed the name, but they would do automatic, like bid adjustments based off of performance and stuff like that. But yeah, those are more for like bigger like enterprise accounts. But I'd say like if you're trying to like save some time, then maximize clicks could be a good out of the gate offering if you're trying to leverage more smart bidding.
How do you feel about enhanced CPC?
I'm pretty indifferent about it. So, enhanced CPC, it is a smart bidding strategy as well. And I haven't really seen it like do a bad job. But sometimes it can overinflate your bids. What are your
Yeah,
thoughts?
I'm in the same corner. I can't remember last time I've ever used enhanced CPC, just because it has a tendency, and it's been reported by the media community as well, or media buyers, where it overinflates your CPC by too much. So
Yeah.
for me, I turn off enhanced CPC altogether. I just ignore it.
Yeah, it's kind of funny because Google has that option, but Bing, they don't no longer have manual. It's all enhanced CPC.
Mm,
And we all know the reason why. It's so that they can increase their revenue at the end of the day. But then they're like, oh, but this is going to help with your return on investment because we're going to try to help you get as many clicks as possible and blah, blah, blah. But
okay.
yeah, I'm pretty indifferent about it. I haven't really seen it dramatically improve results versus manual. So I tend to stay away from it as well.
Okay. Any other pro tips with max conversions?
Nothing that comes to mind right now. How
Okay.
about you?
I would say just make sure you give it enough time. My job as a media buyer and as a marketer, professional marketer to my clients is I look at it as my fiduciary responsibility to assess their risk tolerance. So, like if you deal with a financial advisor, their responsibility is to assess risk tolerance, right? Because you have this client who's handing over their nest egg to a financial advisor, and before they invest, they need to assess risk tolerance, time horizon, portfolio mix, and so on and so forth. I think it's the same thing here, where we as professional marketers, we need to figure out how high is the risk tolerance for our client. And again, I'll give an example. Going back to my doctor client, um, again, we had a campaign on manual for 4 months, and I suggested max conversions, but I also wanted to assess her risk tolerance. Primarily, I asked her if this campaign tanks within the first 2 weeks, do you feel comfortable with that before we start to see results in the third or fourth week? And she says, Dean, I'm completely okay with that. That's just part of marketing. You have to experiment. That's the answer I was looking for. As soon as I got the answer, I was like, okay, let's switch over to max conversions. However, if the client answered, yeah, if campaign tanks in the first couple weeks, I may panic. I mean, she's
Right.
not specifically going to say panic, but if I can like
Yeah,
read it,
concerned. Yeah.
on her face, I'm like, maybe we shouldn't switch over to max conversions.
Right. Right.
So I think a good practice that a lot of meter buyers should do is assess risk tolerance for the client and figure out, how they view risk. If they're pretty tolerant to, or if they're tolerant to volatility, I think you should switch over to max conversions or variations of that. If they're not, maybe you should stick with manual.
Yeah, and generally from my experience working with smaller budgets and smaller clients, they don't really have a high tolerance when it comes to these types of like risky risky moves. So yeah, I agree. It's definitely something to, be considered. And another thing too is just the whole patience thing, right? Like some people, like once we make changes, how long can you wait until we can actually, before you start really like panicking, before you start seeing results? And typically, what's the expectation that you set? Do you usually say it takes 2 to 3 weeks to really start to see the true impact of the maximized conversions or smart bidding in general?
I tell them 3 to 4 weeks.
Okay, yeah.
The majority of my clients, I have a few clients where we're doing a lot of high volume, so I'll say a week.
Yeah.
Actually, sometimes it's like three or
Yeah,
four
it
days.
depends on
But
the budget too. If you
yeah,
have a small budget, it's going to take longer. If you have a bigger budget, it's going to be a lot faster.
yeah,
Yeah.
totally agree.
Okay. And then last point here. What is your case for manual bidding? When do you typically use manual bidding, and do you foresee manual bidding ever going away?
Well, first of all, I hope it never goes away, because if it does, a lot of businesses are screwed, to be honest with you, because, well, this leads me to my first case scenario. I think manual bidding is appropriate for accounts where you're just not getting a lot of conversions. Okay, if you're not getting a lot of conversions in a 30-day cycle, I think you should stick
What's a
to manual.
minimum? What's a minimum? Under 20?
Under 20, I'd say maybe under 15 or 10.
Yeah, I have campaigns that are in that range and I still keep them in manual. Clients are happy too, by the way, because they're high ticket. Thousands and thousands of dollar customer lifetime value is extremely high in the six figures. So they're okay with low volume.
Yeah, I have a couple clients like that where we're only generating like 10 conversions a month. And when I
Yeah,
say conversions, like lead forms or bookings, but they're high ticket. And I tried switching over. Thankfully, um, I have some clients who are very high risk in terms of like, what they're willing to experiment with. I suggested trying max conversions, but it just completely tanked. They're like,
right,
oh, okay, we'll just switch back to manual. And as soon as we switch back to manual, everything was fine again. So I've had to give you a number. I'd say less than 10.
right.
Another case for manual bidding. When you're first starting out, I know Max Clicks is really popular with a lot of agencies where the media buyer is handling 30, 40, 50 accounts, God forbid. But, if you have the bandwidth to manage it on your own and to micromanage every single keyword, I'm very comfortable with manual.
Me too. I'm very, very comfortable with it as well.
Yeah. I um I kind of cringe sometimes when I hear of agencies touting automation. It's such a buzzword in the marketing industry. And when I hear that word too often, I feel like, well, are they actually doing any work on their own? Or are they just relying on Google to do everything for them?
Right. You need to double check. You need to double check the automation.
Yeah, so as much as a lot of agencies love to like brag about tapping the AI or like being automated, I have no problem bragging about the fact that I love manually controlling some of my clients' campaigns and just micromanaging it at least in the first few months before we can switch over, if we switch over at all.
Right, right. Something else that I wanted to jump back to was maximize conversions plus broad match. Um,
Hmm.
have you ever leveraged this strategy? Because this is something that Google's really trying to push out right now. They're really trying to, and I'm not sure if that you saw the Google I/O conference last week, but that was something that they're really trying to push broad match everything, and now broad match plus maximize conversions is apparently a match made in heaven. And I haven't seen any documentation on this, but I've read from some PPC influencers in the RPPC community saying that they're speculating that now broad match is taking into account like user search history. Um, to also help inform of like the matching between your keyword and the actual search query. So what are your
Yeah,
thoughts?
I'm not surprised by that. I think with mass conversions plus broad match, that's the future. When that future comes, I don't know. It could be 6 months from now, it could be 6 years from now. Who knows? But I do think, as much as we media buyers hate broad match sometimes, I know some people really love it. As much as we hate it sometimes, we do have to accept the fact that that is the future down the road. In terms of like campaigns, yeah, I've had mixed results where I've tried pure broad match and the campaign completely tanked. I've had campaigns where I'm trying to think of one campaign where we were doing a lot of phrase match and exact match, and I basically had two ad groups. One was phrase match and one was exact match. And so when I switched over to max conversions, I bundled phrase match and exact match into one ad group because I knew Google needed enough signals to optimize
Mhm.
for it. If I had those two match types in separate ad groups, I don't think the campaign would have performed very well. So I bundled phrase match and exact match into one ad group. And then I started up a new ad group just on broad match. And actually, it wasn't too bad. It performed really well.
Yeah.
I would say the cost per conversions for that broad match ad group matched the bundled ad group of phrase and exact match, but it brought in more volume.
Yeah, yeah. I'll say that Broadmatch has improved a lot since I first started working in PPC. It's definitely improved in terms of the matching, but it's still something you have to pay attention to the search query reports or what's left of it, pretty much. But yeah, I've seen campaigns where they've leveraged smart bidding, so max conversions plus broad match, and I've actually seen the keyword search query report be very clean in terms of it not matching to anything funky. But then that also That also could be because they had a really good negative keyword list too. But yeah, that's pretty much, my thoughts on it. I do see it being the future. It is a little bit scary to think that potentially, max or manual bidding could potentially go away, but I have a backup plan just in case.
Have they talked about that? Like they want manual bidding? I don't think they will ever say that publicly.
No, they haven't. But then there's been speculation in the community. Again, there's always speculation like, oh my gosh, our keyword's going to go away. Is it just going to
Yeah.
be where, well, with the generative AI stuff that Google's been coming out with and the announcement at Google I/O, I had some clients reach out to me and ask me for my opinion about Google's AI. And essentially, what Google is rolling out is when you create a new Google account, I don't know when this is officially going to roll out. You can essentially just go and just drop your URL in there and then answer a few questions, and Google will then put together a campaign for you. So no more, need for a freelancer or an agency apparently. Like that's what Google wants. They don't want you to have to use a freelancer or agency. The problem, though, is how smart is Google's AI going to be in order to understand your business? It's not going to understand your business the same way a freelancer or just in general, a human is going to. And it's not going to be able to develop a strategy that's going to be working in your favor. It's going to be developing a strategy that works in Google's favor to maximize their revenue. So that's just another thing that I wanted to set out as a warning with this whole generative AI, setup with Google. People are really excited about it. I'm curious to see what it's gonna, produce, but at the same time, I'm not really like the most optimistic about it being like a game changer for the industry. They're also talking about using, I know we're kind of going a little bit off topic here, but with like headlines and descriptions using Bard being integrated into Google Ads, so that you'll just answer a few questions and it will give you headlines and descriptions. So you don't need to use a chat GPT or another type of tool, and everything will be done directly in the platform for you, just by answering a few questions.
Yeah, I'm not really surprised by that. I mean, if Google can find a way, as a publicly held company, if Google can find a way to increase their profits, they'll do so, even if it's at the expense of the advertiser or the small business. But I think the key in everything is what you alluded to a couple minutes ago, which is nuance and context. Um, Google's AI, no matter what they say publicly, it's just not smart enough to understand your business. And that's where you will always need a good marketer or freelancer or media buyer. Um, yeah, that's all I have to add to that.
Okay, well, that's pretty much it. Do you have any final thoughts on smart bidding before we wrap this up?
No, other than that, other than be careful of switching over and don't listen to the Google reps when they tout how great their AI is, because it's smart bidding is not as smart as they want you to think.
No, it's not. It's not. So definitely talk to a Google Ads expert or someone to help advise you if you have any questions. And also note that the people that work for Google are not necessarily Google Ads experts either.
No, they're customer service support. People don't understand that. They don't understand that they're calling into a call center where I've never seen a call centers, but I have to imagine there's dozens or if not hundreds of them. Their job is to sell you something. Their job is not to provide a solution.
Yep. All right. So let's go ahead and wrap that up. Thank you guys and see you next time.
Later.